The restaurant hostess glanced down at Marcus Chen's steel-toed work boots, caked with dried concrete dust, then back up at his face with barely concealed disdain. He could feel every eye in the upscale bistro turning toward him as he stood there in his paint-stained jeans and wrinkled flannel shirt. Clutching a single sunflower he'd grabbed from the gas station on his way over. His hands were still rough and calloused from the 12-hour shift he just finished, and there was a streak of grout under his fingernails he hadn't been able to scrub away in the public restroom sink. This was supposed to be the most important night of his life. His first real date with Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had somehow seen past his broken-down truck and his second-hand clothes to the man he was trying so desperately to become. But standing there in that gleaming restaurant full of men in pressed suits and polished shoes, Marcus felt like a fraud who had wandered into the wrong story. If you believe in the power of kindness, in second chances, and in people who refuse to give up on their dreams, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything, and this story will show you exactly why these simple acts of encouragement can change someone's entire world. Marcus had met Sarah 3 weeks earlier at the community college, where he was taking night classes, trying to finish the degree he'd abandoned 8 years ago when his mother got sick. He'd been 20 years old then, a sophomore with big dreams of becoming an architect, designing buildings that would stand for generations. But cancer doesn't care about dreams or timetables, and someone had to take care of his younger sister Emma while working enough jobs to keep them from losing their apartment. So he dropped out, picked up a hammer, and learned construction from the ground up, working dawn to dusk on job sites across the city while his classmates moved on without him. Sarah was everything Marcus thought he could never have. She was an adjunct professor in the art history department, brilliant and elegant, with a warmth in her eyes that made him believe, for just a moment, that maybe he wasn't completely invisible. They'd literally collided in the library stairwell, Marcus rushing down after his business mathematics class, arms full of borrowed textbooks he couldn't afford to buy, while Sarah was heading up with a portfolio of slides for her next lecture. Papers and photographs went flying everywhere, and as they knelt together gathering the scattered materials, their hands touched over a glossy image of the Guggenheim Museum. She'd looked at him then, really looked at him, and smiled like he was someone worth seeing. They'd started talking, those brief conversations expanding from minutes to hours, meeting for coffee in the student center where Marcus would arrive still dusty from job sites, always apologizing for his appearance. Sarah never seemed to mind. She asked about his life, his dreams, his sister who was now in her sophomore year of high school and thriving despite everything. She told him about her own struggles, growing up in foster care, working her way through graduate school on scholarships and student loans, understanding what it meant to fight for every single opportunity. When she'd asked him to dinner, Marcus had felt something crack open in his chest, a possibility he'd locked away years ago suddenly flooding back. But he hadn't expected the emergency at the construction site that afternoon, the plumbing disaster that kept his entire crew overtime, the way his supervisor had grabbed his arm and begged him to stay, promising double pay for the extra hours. Marcus had tried to leave, had explained he had somewhere important to be, but the look in his boss's eyes stopped him. The company was small, barely surviving, and this client could make or break them. So Marcus had stayed, texting Sarah that he'd be late, his heart sinking with every passing hour, certain she'd be gone by the time he finally made it. Now here he was, 2 hours late, looking like he'd crawled out of a construction dumpster, watching the hostess's expression shift from contempt to something almost pitying. She was about to speak, probably to tell him this wasn't the kind of establishment that welcomed his type, when a voice cut through the ambient restaurant chatter like music. Marcus. Sarah was standing up from a corner table, and she wasn't looking at him the way the hostess was, or the way the other diners were sneaking glances at the working class intruder in their refined space. She was looking at him like he'd hung the moon. She crossed the restaurant floor in seconds, and Marcus braced himself for the disappointment, the gentle letdown, the inevitable recognition that she deserved so much better than a guy who showed up to their first real date in work boots and shame. Instead, Sarah reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. Her eyes were shining, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "You came," she whispered. "I was so worried something had happened to you." Marcus tried to apologize, the words tumbling out in a rush about the emergency at work, about not having time to go home and change, about how he'd tried everything to get there on time. but Sarah was shaking her head, and there were actual tears on her lashes now, catching the restaurant's soft lighting. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" she asked. Loud enough that the nearby tables could hear, not seeming to care at all. "I see a man who works 12-hour days and still goes to night school. I see someone who sacrificed his own dreams to take care of his family, who never gave up, even when it would have been easier to quit. I see calloused hands that build things, that create things, that hold up the world for people who depend on him." She took his rough, stained hand in both of hers. "I see those work boots, and I know you came straight here because this mattered to you, because I mattered to you, enough that you didn't want to be a single minute later than you already were." Something was breaking inside Marcus's chest, but it wasn't the painful kind of breaking. It was the sound of all those walls he'd built around his heart, all those years of feeling less than, of believing he wasn't good enough, cracking apart and letting light flood in. Around them, the restaurant had gone quiet. Even the hostess looked moved, her earlier judgment replaced by something softer. Sarah wasn't finished. "I grew up being told I wasn't worth anything because I didn't have a real family, because my clothes came from donation bins, because I didn't fit into the right boxes. And I learned that real worth has nothing to do with what you're wearing or where you come from. It's about who you are when things get hard, about the choices you make when no one's watching, about the kind of person you become when life tries to break you." She squeezed his hands tighter. "You are the most remarkable man I've ever met, Marcus Chen. And I would rather have dinner with you in those work boots than with anyone else in the fanciest shoes money can buy." Marcus couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. But he didn't need to say anything, because Sarah was leading him to their table, where she'd been waiting for 2 hours, where she'd known he would come if he possibly could. They sat down together, and the restaurant slowly resumed its normal rhythm, but everything felt different now. The other diners weren't looking at him with contempt anymore. Some were smiling, and one older couple at a nearby table actually raised their wine glasses in a small, acknowledging toast. They talked for hours that night, the conversation flowing as easily as it always had, but deeper now, more honest. Sarah told him how scared she'd been that he wouldn't show, not because she thought he didn't care, but because she'd been terrified that he'd decide she was too much, that her belief in him was too intense, too fast, too real. Marcus told her about the years of feeling invisible, of wondering if he'd ever be more than just another construction worker with an unfinished degree and fading dreams. They shared their fears and their hopes, and somewhere in that conversation, they both realized they were looking at their future. If this story has touched your heart, if you've ever felt invisible or not good enough, or if you believe in the transformative power of someone seeing your true worth, please help us share this message. Hit that like button. Leave a comment about a time someone believed in you when you couldn't believe in yourself, and subscribe so we can keep bringing you stories that remind us all of the beautiful resilience of the human spirit. 3 years later, Marcus graduated summa cum laude with his architecture degree, walking across that stage with Sarah cheering louder than anyone in the audience and Emma crying happy tears beside her. He still has those work boots in his closet, polished now but still bearing the marks of that life-changing day. They sit next to the steel-toed boots he sometimes still wears when he visits his construction sites, checking on the affordable housing projects his firm designs for working families, who remind him of where he came from. Before we end, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Share your thoughts below. On their wedding day, Sarah gave Marcus a small framed photograph she'd taken without him knowing that night in the restaurant. A candid shot of him holding that gas station sunflower with such hope and fear in his eyes. Beneath it, she'd written, "The bravest thing you ever did was show up exactly as you were, believing you might be enough. You were always more than enough. You were everything." Because sometimes the most profound moments in our lives come not when we're perfectly prepared and polished, but when we show up authentically, vulnerabilities and all, and someone looks past what we're wearing straight into who we truly are. That's when real transformation happens. That's when lives change forever. And that's exactly what happened the night Marcus Chen showed up to a first date in work boots and discovered that being seen for who you really are is the greatest gift anyone can give or receive.